What's happening in the brain when you have Alzheimer's or other related dementia? Well, let's take a look at that. The adult brain contains about 100 billion, that's billion with a B, nerve cells. These are also called neurons. And they have branches that are connected at more than 100 trillion, that's trillion with a T, points. All these neurons, and they're all connected to 100 trillion points. So in the scientific community, this network is known as the neuron forest. So signals traveling through your neuron forest form the basis for the memories, the thoughts, and our feelings. Alzheimer's and other types of dementias are a disease that are going to cause the nerve cells to die and the tissue loss throughout the brain. And so Alzheimer's tissue has fewer and fewer nerve cells in synapses than a healthy brain. Here are some terms that you may have heard of or will be hearing about: plaques and tangles. Plaques are abnormal clusters of protein fragments, and they build up between nerve cells. Dead and dying nerve cells contain tangles, which are made up of twisted strands of another type of protein. The brain shrinks dramatically because of all of this, and that affects nearly all of its functions. That cortex that we've talked about shrivels, and this damage affects the ability to think, to plan, and to remember. Shrinking is the most severe in the hippocampus, and that's the area of the cortex which plays the key role in the formation of new memories. With so many nerve cells in play, you can certainly appreciate that many conditions can affect the brain and its multiple functions. The brain changes are slippery. Sometimes they connect the dots, and other times they're not even on the same line. And the lack of predictability can be very daunting. I like to use the analogy of a slot machine. So, you can picture this. You bring the handle down, and all those cards spinning around. Then they start dropping into place. Well, if they all line up, and they're all the same card, image, you get a bingo, get a cash out. However, sometimes one of those cards is just hanging out there. All right, what is that like to us? That card hanging out there is, what do you call it? What do you call it? What am I trying to tell you? Oh, then that card just dropped down. Oh, I was just trying to tell you that. Well, as the diseases progress, that's going to happen more and more, and that's very frustrating. Listen, it's frustrating for you, but it is very frustrating for them. And I want you to understand something. Please believe me. They are not playing with you. A challenge with this disease, a challenge with these diseases, is that they're going to have moments of absolute clarity. And you're going to think, all right, this is really a game. How can they get all of that right, but they profess not to remember this? It's that slot machine. All the cards were lining up at that moment, but they weren't lining up before. And that's where it's really important that we know what we're dealing with, that we understand what can be happening. As you know, having the disease is horrible. But when you're the person living with someone with this disease, it's even more difficult. We're the ones who have to have the patience. Keep in mind that wherever the disease is in the brain, the section where it is, that's determining the actions and the behaviors. And since this is a slow, progressive development, it takes years for permanent impairment. That's why you have these waves, these ebbs and flows. How can they not get this straight, but they can do that? How can they do this, but they can't remember that? Gosh, I can't tell you how often people say, well, I don't know why they can't remember this. It just happened last year, or it happened 2 days ago. But they know all of their grandchildren. They know their children. They know where they were raised. Okay. Let me just tell you, those are long-term memories that they're holding on to, where they grew up, what they did in high school. They're now in their 70s or 80s. They're not remembering the short-term memory issues, what happened yesterday, or what happened last week, or that fabulous vacation you took that they said they'd never forget. They might remember the feelings of happiness. They can't quite pinpoint where they went on that trip, or did they really go on that trip? Those are the times when you just want to pull your hair out. So when you really understand this disease, the parts of the brain that are being impacted, you'll have a better understanding for what to anticipate. And just when you really think you've got a handle on it, okay, I'm following this, I'm anticipating this is going to happen, well, get ready for Mr. Magoo's wild ride, because that's what's going to happen. This is an ever-changing roller coaster. Our loved ones know things are changing, and they're reacting accordingly. They're acting out, they're angry, they're depressed, they're maudlin. They're just not themselves. And that makes life difficult for them, but it makes it difficult for you, too, to find the middle ground. Well, let me offer you this thought, something that I came upon myself many years ago when I realized the complexity of what I was going through with my mother. I should say what my mother was going through. I thought I could be really angry. I could be really, really upset. I could lose my patience. But I knew deep down inside, this wasn't my mother. This was my mother with a disease. And the idea came to me. Let it be like the wind between the leaves of the tree, just going through you. Don't let it attach to you. I can't begin to know how that concept came to me, but I have been so forever grateful that it did. And it made a difference for me on how I dealt moving forward, how I dealt with my mother, how I coped with managing things from my father to understand what was going on with my mother. It took a huge burden off of me. Now, please don't interpret this as everything was just great thereafter. I am not Pollyanna. I have been through hell. Believe me. I really do understand how challenging this is for you. And depending on where you are on this journey, I can anticipate what you're going to soon be visiting. But if you would allow yourself to just step back, truly appreciate that they have no control over what's happening. They hate it as much as you do. They hate it more. They're losing themselves. They are pulling and dragging, and they're going kicking and screaming. And you know it because they're probably lashing out at you in an awful lot of ways. If you can find the strength, inner strength, if you can trust that you will find your way, let it be like the wind blowing through the leaves of the tree, and don't let it attach to you. That will enable you to be a very successful care partner to your loved one. That will protect you. And listen, as important as they are, your life matters too. Okay?